MilPro again. Now, I haven't done a YouTube instructional type video in a long time. I really haven't had time to put that much energy into it lately, but had some time right now, and I thought I would touch on a topic that I haven't really heard anybody talking about. I've heard a lot of people talking about their security, talking about their survival shelters, bug out locations, communities, things like that. But I haven't heard anyone talk about the process of determining what your level of security and what your level of response is going to be. And what I'm talking about is a threat assessment, a physical security assessment, things like that. So I thought I would touch on that, and I'm going to go over that briefly. It's just going to be an overview, give you some bullet point type information so you can go out there and do the legwork yourself. It's all out there. It's available on the internet in various books on the topic, things like that, instructional manuals. But I'm just going to give you a brief overview, and maybe if I do a part 2 to this, I'll actually get some visual aids and try to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. But first I wanted to say thank you. I went over 500 subs recently. It just sort of crept up on me. But during that time, I received some shout outs from some people to help promote my channel, which was greatly appreciated. Analytical Survival, for one. Fair Warning, or I'm sorry, Mr. Fair Warning, just did one yesterday, and they're great, and I really appreciate them taking the time to help promote other channels like myself and the other people that were included in their little shout outs. So that was very cool. And again, people like Captain Burrs and Smitty 2012 and all the other people who I hear from all the time, who keep me going and give me encouragement and give me a shout out now and then. You're all great, and I really appreciate it. So that's out of the way. Now, there are 3 stages to basically doing a physical security assessment, let's call it. Number 1 is probability, and I'll put some little visuals in there with the lingo. But the first piece of the process is probability, analyzing exactly what the probability of this fear that you have is actually going to happen, or that it can happen. So let's say you're just a business owner and you're concerned about a break-in, robbery, or theft of your equipment. Well, if you run a mom and pop welding operation in rural Oklahoma, where the last time there was a murder was when Jesse James was in town, you really don't need to worry too much about it. What you need to do is get a basic security system, get a nice strong safe, and lock the door when you leave at night, and you're probably going to be just fine. But if you're selling anti-Islamic literature and t-shirts in Dearborn, Michigan, you might think the probability of you being a target is greater, and you would probably be right. So you have to do an honest assessment of your surroundings and your environment. The riots in London, for instance, a lot of people I'm sure are looking at that right now and saying, what's the probability of that happening in my neighborhood or in my city? Well, you just kind of have to look at the history of the city. Has anything like that happened before? What your crime rates are, what your economic status is in the city currently, and what the overall, kind of get a feel for the pulse of the city. And if those types of things have happened in the past, then you have to kind of raise the probability level to the likely area on your list or on your assessment. So you just have to go through that process. What is the actual honest probability that I may be a target, or my property may be a target of whatever? So if I know right after 9/11 there was a lot of emphasis on anti-terrorism, and a lot of these people were paying high-priced consultants to come in and make determinations and recommend procedures and policies and so on and so forth, when almost all of the businesses in the United States are not a probable or potential target for terrorists. It just isn't likely. They hit a specific type of target. They want mass destruction, or they want to get the most media play or have the most emotional impact on people. So burning down the t-shirt silk screening plant in Alabama not really a great target for a terrorist if they're trying to accomplish their goals. So if you would like to pay me a $20,000 consulting fee to come out and look at your property, please, just send me an email. I'll be glad to do that for you. Probably not necessary. But, if your concern is, let's say, a bug out shelter or a bug out location, you need to look at other things as far as, because part 2 is your vulnerability. How vulnerable am I or this equipment or this piece of property actually to an attack, to being overrun, to being plundered, or just being taken, having a resource taken, so on and so forth. So you have to look at that individual piece of your overall structure, your overall compound or your shelter or your plan, and determine how vulnerable each piece of it may be. And then you allocate your resources and manpower accordingly. This also goes into planning and constructing your compound or your community, or putting together your bug out shelter location, where you're going to place your resources, or if the resources are naturally there, like say a spring or a well, your source of water, you don't want that to be outside your protected perimeter or even on the edge of your protected perimeter. You want that to be closer inside where it can be better defended and protected and watched. So that's your vulnerability assessment in your overall physical security assessment. And you have to do that for each piece of your plan. Now, finally, the third piece is what's called a criticality assessment. And yes, we actually use that word. I don't even know if it's a real word, but it's in the manuals. A criticality assessment is where you look at each piece of it, of your plan, your compound, your facility, and you determine how critical each individual piece of it is. For instance, determining the critical nature of your fallout shelter, or your bomb shelter, where everybody's going to go in a tornado, things like that. That's pretty critical to the survivability of your little group, or your family, or your community. The outhouses, not so much. If something happens to that outhouse, an errant mortar hits it, could happen. We're talking WROL here, right? You can always build a new one, or dig a new pit. So you don't really need to allocate that many resources to preserving and protecting the outhouse. You want to allocate those resources and that manpower to protecting much more critical infrastructure for your shelter or your community. So that's your three pieces: probability, vulnerability, and criticality. And once you assess all of those three areas, you take all of that information, you lay it out on a table, and you get your best and brightest minds together, and you determine how you're going to allocate your resources and manpower in order to best protect your community and your shelter location. Now, there are certain things that also I haven't heard people talk about a lot, and I have seen some of this out there, which is it's very important. But a lot of you facility management type people, or you CBs, I know you guys are going to know what I'm talking about, but your waste, what to do with your waste. So, we used to call them the poop pond, your evaporation ponds, where you just take all this waste and move it around, and it naturally evaporates, and yada yada yada, those types of things. You really have to think about when you're talking about long-term survival of a community, or even a family, or an extended family, or a group of families in a survival situation. You really have to take those things into consideration for just for health and disease purposes. You have to take those things into consideration. So think about those. Those are your bullet points. Take that information and run with it. Do your own research. Do your legwork. Get more information. It's out there. Trust me. The courses that I took on it were years ago, and so I know that information's got to be out on the internet somewhere. I haven't actually looked for it myself, but that gives you a starting point. Look at your probability assessment, your vulnerability assessment, your criticality assessment, and combine those to create your physical security policy, protocol, procedure whatever you want to call it, in order to allocate your resources and your manpower to best protect your bug out shelter, your home, your business, your community. So that's it for now. If I do a second one, like I said, we'll maybe go into a little more detail, but until then, this is MilPro Akron. Train safe, train hard, stay alive.